Mad Max, come with us now to an alternate timeline. We're going to the year 2007, but this was not the 2007 of our timeline. This was a different 2007. A year where the world was on the verge of collapse. Everything was crumbling. Since 1990, the Third World War was raging on. What started as a war between the United States and Iraq over Kuwait quickly escalated into World War III, and it had raged on for 17 years. And during those 17 years of war, many fought and died, and the oil fields in the Middle East were set alight, driving gas prices up around the world and causing severe shortages of gas. And then it all began to spiral out of control in the early 2000s with the stock market crash of 2002 and the ensuing high numbers of unemployment and the widespread lawlessness as crime began to skyrocket out of control. And then around 2005, a horrible pandemic had occurred, which is still raging. A flu, kind of like the one from 1918, brought on by the war, and many soldiers who returned home, and many people who were starving, weakened immune systems equaled high death tolls from this flu pandemic. And now we go to State Road 98 in the Big Bend area of Florida. Well, it was a quiet day, and nothing was really going on. There was a sign on the highway that said, "Highway fatalities this year, 57." And the sign said, "Monitored by the Main Force Patrol." The Main Force Patrol was made by the government, founded in 2003. Their sole purpose was to pretty much help with the widespread lawlessness to try to keep as much control as possible. They were allowed to aid the police and the highway patrol in their duties. And a lot of places, like in the area of the Big Bend, they were the only law that was still around. And on the very desolate stretch of the old state road, there was one of the MFP police cars, a newer model Chevy Impala with the police packaging to give it more power, more speed, and to make arrests, and lights and sirens. But these were not painted like ordinary police cars in the area. MFP police cars were all painted yellow, red, and navy blue. And they usually had on the back of the trunk, painted in white, what their designation was: Pursuit, Interceptor. This one was labeled Pursuit. In the vehicle was one young MFP officer who was half asleep. He was very thin, with his head very cut low, almost bald. His name was Charlie, and he was the one in charge of driving, and he was in the car almost asleep. And his partner, Roop, was out with his hunting rifle looking through the scope. He was using the scope like a binocular and spying on a young teenage couple that were about to have sex out in the field. Well, as the men were doing their duty, suddenly the radio crackles to life.
Breaker 1, we are in pursuit of a stolen pursuit special. Runs on methane. Modified 1971 Dodge Charger. Repeat, anyone. We are in pursuit of stolen pursuit special. Modified 1971 Dodge Charger. Modified to run on methane. Stolen by a biker leader named the Night Rider. Repeat.
The radio broadcast quickly woke Charlie from his stupor, and then he honks the horn for Roop. And he screams for Roop, "Roop! Roop, man! Hurry! We got some guy that just stole a pursuit special. Sounds like a crazed biker jockey." Of course, Charlie screaming and honking the horn scared the teenage couple that were about to get it on at the field, and it made Roop, a 6-foot, rather heavy-set man with straight brown hair, angry. Roop runs back to the car, gets into the passenger side, and then Charlie turns on the lights and siren and floors it. Soon they were on pursuit of the stolen pursuit special. The pursuit special, as it was described on the radio, was a modified navy blue 1971 Dodge Charger. Like most of the pursuit specials, it was a repurposed muscle car, and it was stolen by a nefarious biker gang leader named the Knight Rider, who had his hair piked up in spikes and had a teardrop tattoo on his left cheek with his crazy girlfriend. Both of them were high as a kite, and the radio broadcast was describing him.
Be aware that the perp is 28 years old, Johnson Keys. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. He has killed 2 police officers and 2 MFP officers in Cedar Key and stolen the pursuit special.
Meanwhile, on the lonely stretch of highway, the stolen Charger was coming down the road at high speed. Area had shown signs of damage from the reckless driving of the suspect, and hot behind it was an MFP car right on its tail, ready to catch up to him. And as the pursuit was going on, the Knight Rider was on the radio taunting the Main Force patrol officers.
I am the Knight Rider, born with a steering wheel in my hand. Remember me when you look in the night sky. You see me now, Toe Cutter? You see me now? I'm the one. I am the one.
When Charlie heard the Knight Rider on the radio, he says to Roop, "Oh, Jesus, God, man, a terminal crazy." Roop and Charlie's vehicle was closing in on them fast. As Roop was readying his rifle, he opens the sunroof and sticks his upper body out, and he takes aim with his rifle on the oncoming pursuit special. And then the crazed Knight Rider saw him, ready to take aim, and he quickly slammed the brakes of the car, and the vehicle of Roop and Charlie rocketed past them. Roop shot, but ended up hitting a street sign, and Charlie quickly slammed the brakes. Then the Knight Rider floors the stolen police vehicle past them. And the other MFP vehicle that was chasing the stolen vehicle almost hits Charlie and Roop's car, narrowly missing it. Charlie was shooken up, and then Roop, angry, gets out of the passenger section of the car, walks over to the driver section, and tells Charlie to get out. "I'm going to take over." Charlie says, "No, man, I'm the one assigned to drive the vehicle today." And then Roop says to Charlie, "God damn it, man, move over." And then Charlie obliges, saying, "Well, I don't have to work with a blasphemer." Roop gets into the driver's side, shuts the door, says on the radio that they're back in the chase, and takes off. The chase was long, as they were going through small town after small town. As they were getting into one small town, they nearly ran over a child on the road. The mother was fearful, but she was relieved that the child was okay. And then, during the height of the chase, the dispatcher was calling for any more available units, specifically one man that they were really looking for. His name was Jim Goose, a tall, slender man with semi-long hair, straight and brown, and his face mottled with acne scars. He was about 28 years old also, and he was the lone motorcycle cop of MFP. He was at a little diner named Fat Nancy's, telling a local patron about horrific accident stories of mangled corpses on the roadway that he's seen. And then suddenly their lunch was interrupted as they could see the car chase flying in front of the diner. Then Goose quickly gets up, grabs his helmet, and runs outside to his motorcycle, a 2003 Kawasaki Ninja ZXRR with the MFP paint scheme. And Goose quickly jumps on it and starts it up and takes off. During the chase, suddenly a van starts pulling out, and the Knight Rider quickly swerved to avoid hitting the van. But Roop and Charlie and the other MFP officers in the other vehicle did not react in time, and both vehicles crashed head on to the van, completely obliterating the van and causing the one MFP vehicle to completely flip upside down and land on the roof, and Roop and Charlie's vehicle to go airborne and crash hard against a light pole. And quickly catching up to them at high speed was Goose on his Kawasaki. As he saw the wreck ahead, he quickly had to hit the brakes, but since motorcycle brakes are different from car brakes, he had to really put the motorcycle low and narrowly avoided hitting the wrecked van. A spectator quickly came to Goose and asked him what was going on. Goose quickly took off his helmet and said to the spectator, "I don't know, sir. I just joined the party myself." Meanwhile, in Roop and Charlie's car, Roop was very angry that he couldn't continue the chase, and he looked at Charlie as Charlie was clutching his throat and there was a lot of blood coming out. Charlie grabs the radio mic and says, "Breaker, breaker, this is Roop. We are out of the chase. Send a meat wagon. There's a massive accident, and Charlie has a throat injury." And further down, away from the chase scene, was a lone MFP vehicle there, with the lettering in the trunk saying Interceptor. And there in the vehicle's driver's side was a 25-year-old man, slick-backed hair, wearing the black leather uniform of the MFP, and dark sunglasses on. He had been hearing the entire chase unfold on the radio, and after the wreckage, he could hear Roop's voice saying, "Max, he's all yours." And then the man who's now identified as Max gets on the radio and he says, "Dispatch, this is Rokotansky. I'm going after the perp." Max quickly starts up the twin turbocharged V6 Interceptor and begins to pull out of his spot where he was monitoring traffic. Soon Max pulls up on the road opposite of the crazed Knight Rider who was coming in fast. As he was revving his engine, he was ready to play a deadly game of chicken to get the Knight Rider off the road. And as soon as he saw the Stolen Pursuit Special coming up fast, Max quickly floors it to go after him. And both vehicles were coming at each other fast, both drivers unflinching. Then suddenly the Knight Rider chickened out and pulled away. And Max quickly hits the brakes of his Interceptor and does a moonshiner's turn and goes right after Knight Rider. As he was quickly catching up to the Knight Rider, the Knight Rider was now crying, his trashy girlfriend asking him, "What's wrong, baby? What's wrong?" Knight Rider was, "Oh God, it's over. It's over. Those damn pigs are not going to take me alive." And then he starts screaming, "You hear me, Bronze? You hear me? You're not taking me alive." Of course, the Knight Rider, talking to his trashy girlfriend, did not pay attention to a giant pileup on the middle of the road. And the man that was holding the stop sign to direct traffic was screaming at him to stop, but the Knight Rider just flew past him, and then when he saw the massive car pile up ahead, it was too late. He slammed the brakes, but he crashed head on, and there was a massive explosion. Max quickly stops his car and gets out, and he steps a few feet away from his Interceptor and takes off his sunglasses as he looks at the spectacular crash and explosion. It was over. The Knight Rider was dead. Oh, later, Max had come home. After being on the streets for 3 weeks, he was just ready to come home back to his loving girlfriend, Jessie, a woman about 3 years older than Max. She was 28 years old. Blonde hair, hazel eyes, And Max and her met each other when Max was in high school. Well, later they reunited with each other in the early part of the decade and they stayed together. They were always going to get married, but the way things had been going, they decided not to. So Jesse gave Max a nice homecoming at the beach house that they lived in. The beach house was right on the beach in the Gulf of Mexico, just a few miles south of the town of Horseshoe Beach. It was an idyllic existence for Max with his girlfriend Jessie. It was away from the imploding cities and far enough away from the carnage of the highways. But Max was just happy to have a home-cooked meal, a hot shower, and to be with his girlfriend. As he got out of the shower, he saw Jessie was watching TV. Of course, the TV was beaming in images of death and destruction from all around. Riots in the big cities, Armalite gangs running loose in the closed-off sections of major interstates and state roads, attacking small towns and attacking trucking caravans, taking supplies and taking gasoline. Then Max saw his face on the TV as the news was talking about the young hero cop who killed another gang leader. And then Max says to Jesse, "Turn that off, I don't want to see it." And then Jesse says, "Come on, Max, what happened out there?" And then Max says to Jesse, "Jesse, you know the rules. I don't talk about my job." And then Jesse says, "Okay," and she turns off the TV. And then Max sits down in his favorite chair, and then he tells Jesse, "Jesse, I just want to relax. I've been on the road for a while. I just want to spend some quality time with you, honey, because that's all I can do when I'm on the road. Think about you," he says to her. Jesse smiles, and then sits on Max's lap, and then they begin to passionately kiss, and soon they consummate their relationship. And then the next morning, Max wakes up, has breakfast with Jesse, and Jesse was very upset that Max was going back out there. And then Max says, "Well, I'm sorry, Jesse. I have a job to do, and I'm not going back out on the road. I got to go to the halls of justice, meeting with the Sarge. I wonder what's going on." So Max grabs Jesse, hugs her, and kisses her. Jessie had a tear in her eye, and then she tells Max, "Be careful. All I see on the news is that MFP officers are dying like crazy out there." And then Max says, "I will." And then Max gets into his interceptor and drives off. He arrives at the Hall of Justice. The Halls of Justice was where his squad, Breaker Squad, were stationed at. It was an old logging mill that had been abandoned for years, and it was repurposed by the MFP, given a new coat of paint and some repairs, and now it is the Breaker Squad's home base. Max pulls up and waits for Goose to arrive. Him and Goose were supposed to do some patrolling in the local area, and then he could hear Goose's Kawasaki pull up. Goose was sporting a minor leg injury from the chase. He had his right leg wrapped up and resting on the handlebars. And then Goose pulls up and turns off his motorcycle. He gets off and he says, "Well, Max, come on, let's go see Barry. Barry says he's got something for us." So Goose and Max head down to the cavernous underground parking garage, which was being used by Breaker Squad to maintain and repair Breaker Squad's small fleet of vehicles. And then there was Barry, Breaker Squad's mechanic. He was an average height man, thin build, in his mid-20s. And he says to Max and Goose, "Oh, hey guys, come on, let me show you this." So they followed Barry through the line of vehicles that were in different stages of repair and disrepair. Max could also see Charlie and Roop's damaged cruiser, and it looked like Barry had begun the repair phase. But they finally reach the end of the parking garage, and there Max saw it. A 1970 death black Ford Gran Torino. It had been painted black. It already had the MFP decal on it, and the hood was off, and Max could clearly see a massive V8 engine with a 671 Weend Roots type supercharger in the center. And then Barry starts to tell Max she's the last of the V8. Well, not really the last of the V8, but she is very powerful. She has dual overhead cam. She has a powerful supercharger, and she can run on alternative fuels. Right now, I have her loaded up with nitromethane, and she also has a powerful racing fuel injection, and she generates 600 horsepower through the wheel. And then Goose, who was also smiling, says to Barry, "Barry, start her up." And then Barry runs over to the driver's side, opens the door, and starts up the Gran Torino. Goose had noticed that Max's jaw was completely dropped, and he says to Barry, "Barry, check it out. He's in a coma, man." Then Barry steps out of the car and says, "Yep, we finally got one, Max. We finally got one. A pursuit special." And then Max goes into the driver's side of the Gran Torino and steps on the pedal to rev up the engine himself. The sound of the massive supercharged V8 was music to Max's ears. Then he turns off the engine and steps out, and he asks Barry, "Barry, how were you able to get all this together?" And Barry says to Max, "Come on, Max. These Pursuit Specials are just repurposed old muscle cars. Don't you think I can get my hands on one and start making our own version of the Pursuit Special?" And then Max says, "Barry, you're a genius. Now I have one question. When do we test drive this sucker?" And then the guys were starting to cheer and everything. Unbeknownst to the guys in the garage, they were being listened to. There was a microphone down there, and up in the offices of the sergeant was Sergeant Philip McFadden, or Phil as he's known to the guys. He was the sergeant of Breaker Squad. He was a short but very built black man, clean-shaven head, in his mid-40s, and he was a no-nonsense sergeant of Breaker Squad. And with him was a tall, slender, middle-aged white man who was also listening in with the sergeant and hearing the guy's reaction to the pursuit special. And then the middle-aged white guy asks Phil, "So, did he take the bait?" And Phil says to him, "He took it beautifully, Captain Labatouche." Then Captain Labatouche, who was Phil's superior, says, "Well, excellent. This should stave off young Rokitansky's threats to quit the force." And then Phil says to Labatouche, "Well, hopefully it will, because I can't afford to lose him. He's my best driver." And he says to Labatouche, "And anyways, there's still the problem that this squad needs more money and men." And then Labatouche says to Phil, "Well, McFadden, right now my main concern is trying to get more men in here." And Phil says, "All right, Labatouche, we'll talk about this later at the sergeant's meeting." And then Labatouche says to Phil, "Well, good luck, Phil. I'm glad I was able to stop one important officer from quitting." And then he walks away. Phil then sits down at his desk and lets out a deep sigh. And then he was thinking to himself how he was going to hold this squad together. Phil himself was a veteran police officer. In the late 80s and early 90s, he served in the military and saw action in the early part of the Third World War when an injury forced him out. Then he served as a police officer in the Atlanta PD for several years before he became a state trooper for Georgia. And then afterwards, he joined the MFP when they were forming. And he, just like many sergeants of these squads, were dealing with underfundedness, overwork, and high mortality rates with the MFP officers. Breaker Squad is a small squad compared to other squads in MFP. And when Phil was assigned to be the sergeant of Breaker Squad, he had 30 men. And within a couple years, he was down to now 10 men. And every time he got a batch of new MFP officers, they were quickly killed off. And there was really nothing he could do. Every time they get rid of one Armalite gang, another one appears with greater number of members. And it just seems to be a never-ending cycle of death and destruction out there. Meanwhile, in the tiny town of Otter Creek, Florida, it was a very small town with a population of no more of 150 people, and trouble was coming into town. The sleepy Sunday morning was disturbed by the sound of a motorcycle gang coming into the town. The motorcycle gang parks by a grocery shop, and then they all began to rev their engines at the same time before they were signaled to stop by the leader of the gang. The entire gang turn off their motorcycles. It was probably about 15 of them in this group. And the leader steps off his motorcycle, wearing a beat-up old brown leather jacket. He takes off his black helmet to reveal a young man in his late 20s with short blonde hair slicked back, and he was very tall. He was about maybe 6'4". But he was thin-built, he was not imposing at all, but there was a look to his face that would strike fear to anyone that looked at it. And as he was walking towards the train station, he was signaling for a couple guys to come with him. Another member of the group, who was wearing an all-black leather jacket, takes off his blue helmet to reveal a man in his mid-20s with black hair, semi-long, slicked back, and eyeliner on. He was more frightening looking than the leader. He was also joined by several more members of the gang, and they all head into the train station. There in the train station, there was a middle-aged, scrawny man that was standing next to a coffin. The leader of the gang and his cronies walk up to him, with the leader saying to the man, "We've come for our friend." The middle-aged porter looks at the leader of the gang, and he had a bit of a fright looking at him. Then he says, "Well, if you come for your friend, you have to sign these paperwork. That way I can release him to you." And then the leader grabs the clipboard and uses the pen on it to sign the release forms. Then he gives the release forms back to the middle-aged porter, and then the porter says, I don't know what happened to him, but I heard this man got pretty fried in a car accident." Then the leader of the gang quickly grabs the porter by the throat with his left hand, and he lets out a hiss, and he says to the porter, who was choking and also frightened, "His name is the Night Rider. Remember him when you look into the night sky." The porter nervously shakes his head yes, and then the leader lets him go. And then he says to the second in command, the young man with the slick black hair, "Bubba, take the coffin and load it up to the truck. We bury him tomorrow morning." Bubba says, "Yes, Toe Cutter." And him and the other gang members take the coffin and walk away with it. By the early afternoon, the motorcycle gang was having fun at the center of town as they were doing burnouts, while being cheered on by the younger townsfolks. Meanwhile, a young teenage couple were watching the whole thing. And the young teenage man says to his girlfriend, "Come on, Lizzie, let's get the hell out of here. I don't like the looks of these guys." And then the now identified young teenage girl, Lizzie, says, "Oh, come on, Rob. Let's just stay here and just don't do anything. They'll leave eventually." Rob says to Lizzie, "No, come on, let's go. Get in the car." So the two of them get into Rob's old Honda CRX, painted fire engine red with a flame design in the front. He uses it for racing. He modified that thing to be fast, and now he was going to get out of town. Soon he starts the engine and takes off. In the process, he almost runs over Toe Cutter, who was just exiting the general store. Toe Cutter screams, "Get him!" And the gang quickly start going after the Honda CRX as they quickly catch up to the young couple and began to attack their car. After the car spins out of control and comes to a stop at the side of the road, the gang quickly begin to pound and hammer away at the CRX. They smash the windows and pull out young Rob, and then they smash the other window and pull out his girlfriend Lizzie as she screams in terror. Later on in the afternoon, Max is with Goose as they're patrolling the area in Max's Interceptor. It was all quiet, and Max and Goose were just talking crap, and then they spot a somewhat nude Rob running through the wheat fields, and Goose quickly turns on the bullhorn. He says,
"Hey you, young man, stop right there."
Rob turns to look and sees the MFP car, and then he starts running off deeper into the fields, and then Goose says over the loudspeaker,
"Okay, that's right, keep running, you turkey."
Max says to Goose, "I wonder what's going on." And then they keep going down the road until they see the wreckage of the CRX. There was hardly anything left. The two guys quickly got out of the car and investigated. And Max says, "What the hell happened here?" Goose says, "I don't know, but somebody was having fun wrecking this car." And then Max saw in shock young Lizzie, who was now nude and had a dog collar over her, and she was tied to a leash. The leash was tied around the frame of the car, and she quickly cowered in fear as she saw Max. And then Max says, "Goose, check this out." And then Goose ran and sees the nude Lizzie, and he says, "Dear God in heaven, what went on here?" And then they heard a laughter. They ran to the front of the car, and there they saw him, a young kid, probably no more than 16, 17. He was one of the members of the biker gang. He was probably their youngest one, and he was high as a kite. Goose says to Max, "Max, radio this in. I'm going to arrest this punk." And then Goose quickly grabs the young biker by his leather jacket lapel. The young biker just laughed even more maniacally, and Goose says, "Oh, you think this is funny, huh? You think this is funny?" And then Goose proceeded to give him a right hook, and then gave him a left hook, and then pulled out his handcuffs and cuffed him. Max gets on the radio, and he says, "Dispatch, dispatch, come in. I don't know what happened here. We found a wreckage, and there's possibly a rape victim. Get a rape counselor out here and get an ambulance and some reinforcements. Over." The voice crackles on the radio saying, "Roger." And later on, the biker gang were following a pickup truck. The pickup truck had on the back the casket with the remains of the Knight Rider, and sitting next to the casket was Toe Cutter. As each biker pulls up to the back of the truck, the Toe Cutter grabs a holy water sprinkler and sprinkles the signs of the cross on each member of the biker gang, and then they pull away to the front of the truck. And then Bubba comes up and he signals the truck to stop, and then the truck stops, and Bubba takes off his helmet and he says, "Toe Cutter, it's Johnny the boy. He got wasted and he stayed behind at the wreck." Then Toe Cutter says, "Well, Bubba, go get Johnny the boy. How's he ever gonna learn?" And then Bubba says, "We're wasting our time with him, Toe Cutter. Let's just kill him." And Toe Cutter says to Bubba, "No, Johnny the boy needs to learn. Go and get him out." A day or two later, at the Halls of Justice, Johnny the boy was now in a business suit that was loaned to him, and he was manacled up. And Goose was throwing pieces of his playing card at him, saying, "All right, punk, just get ready to go to jail for a very long time." Then Sergeant McFadden comes into the holding area, and he tells Max and the rest of the officers, "Guys, I'm going to need your help. They're going to let the punk go." And then everybody's like, What do you mean they're going to let him go?" And then McFadden explains, "Nobody in the town showed up, and the semen on the woman did not match the kids, so we're going to have to let him go." And then Max says, "Oh, great." Then the lawyers showed up, and this one very astute, nerdy-sounding lawyer says to the rest of the MFP officers and the sergeant, "All right, you need to let my client go. He was wrongfully arrested, and he was assaulted by the police. I am going to have charges pressed against your squad," he says to the sergeant. And then Max goes to Goose and he says, "Goose, we're going to have to let him go." And then he signals Goose to come over towards him. And then Max explains everything to Goose's ear. And Goose is like, "What? No, you can't let the son of a bitch go. No, you can't." And then Max says to Goose, "Goose, we have no choice. We have to let him go. Nobody in the town showed up, and the semen did not match his." And what followed was total chaos between the MFP officers screaming at the lawyers and the lawyers screaming back at the MFP. Goose lost his temper and savagely beat up Johnny the Kid in front of his lawyer, and Max lost his temper and punched the nerdy astute lawyer right in his face, breaking his nose. And the lawyer says, "Okay, Mr. Reskatowski, you're in trouble." As they were exiting the building, Johnny the boy quickly turns around and he says to Goose, "You're dead, man. Bronze, you're dead." And then he leaves with his lawyer. Afterwards, Sergeant McFadden says to his officers, "All right, boys, long as the paperwork is clean, you're free to do anything you want out there." Well, Johnny the boy goes to the waiting Bubba Zanetti, and they have a little celebration on the beach with the bikers acting very perverted to a mannequin that they stole. And then Bubba Zanetti whispers to Toe Cutter, and Toe Cutter says, "Boys, she may be contaminated. The Bronze may have put a listening device in her." And then Toe Cutter grabs his shotgun and shoots the mannequin. Of course, Johnny the boy was laughing hysterically at the whole thing, and then angrily, Toe Cutter goes over to Johnny the boy, grabs him by his hair, pulls him up from the sand, and then sticks the shotgun in Johnny the boy's mouth, and he says, Johnny the boy, you have been misbehaving. You have been doing drugs, and you have been getting yourself arrested by the Bronze." And Johnny looks in terror into Toe Cutter's eyes, and he says with the gun still in his mouth, I didn't mean to, man. I didn't mean to. And then Toe Cutter says to Johnny, we're going to have to learn you good. We're going to have to learn you very good. Johnny the boy was terrified of what that meant. Later on that night, at a local bar called the Sugartown Cabaret, it was a normal bar / nightclub where everyone was dancing, trying to have fun in a very chaotic world. Goose was there enjoying himself, trying to forget what happened earlier today. Since he was an MFP officer, he was taking advantage of the law enforcement discount at the club. That saved him from paying the exorbitant $15 for a bottle of beer. And then he was also eyeing the club singer that night. But meanwhile, outside in the parking lot of the nightclub, there was Johnny the boy doing something, sabotaging Goose's motorcycle. Later on the next morning, Goose was leaving the apartment of the nightclub singer. He had a one-nighter with her. And he gets into his motorcycle and he starts taking off. He was heading back to the Halls of Justice, going high speed. Then suddenly, his motorcycle began to give out. He lost control. He jerks the handlebar and he heads off to the side of the road and he gets airborne before he lands hard into the field. Goose was out for a while. When he regained consciousness, there was Johnny the Boy looking over him, along with Toe Cutter. Both men were smiling sadistically at him. Goose could smell gasoline. Gasoline was spilling from the fuel tank of his motorcycle and soaked the ground around him where he was laying at. And Toe Cutter pulls out a cigarette and a matchbook. He puts the cigarette in his mouth and he gives the matchbook to Johnny and he says, "All right, Johnny, light me up." And then Johnny takes the match from the matchbook, strikes the head, and then he was about to light Toe Cutter's cigarette, and then Toe Cutter grabs his hand that had the match and he says, "Okay, Johnny, this is it. Now you gotta prove your worth in this gang. Are you going to kill the Bronze?" Johnny looked in terror at the injured Goose on the ground, and he says, I can't do it, as the match was starting to burn down. And then Toe Cutter says, "You have to do it, Johnny. If you want to move up, you have to do it." And Johnny's like, "No, man, no, I can't. I can't." And then Toe Cutter says, "You can, and you will." Then the flame on the match was starting to reach Johnny's fingers, and finally when the flame on the match reached Johnny's finger, he quickly lets out an owl and he lets go of the lit match, and it falls to the gasoline soaked grass and it quickly catches fire, and he watches in terror as the flames engulf Goose, and Goose was screaming in agony. Johnny had a tear running down his cheek, and a demonic smile was coming from Toe Cutter, and Toe Cutter says, "You do us proud, boy, you do us proud, you're learning." The next day at a nearby hospital, Sergeant McFadden was there in the halls of the ICU with a couple of guys from the MFP. Max comes walking in hurriedly, and he says to Sergeant McFadden, "Sarge, I heard what happened. Is he in there?" And then Sergeant McFadden says, "Listen to me, Max. He's burnt pretty badly, kid. I hope you can take it." And then Max quickly goes into the room where Goose was, and he saw that there was an oxygen tent around Goose's bed, and he can hear the sound of the respirator and the monitors. Max walks cautiously towards the bed, and as he got closer to the bed, he saw the charred hands of Goose falling out of the oxygen tent. And then Max got even closer, and he saw through the plastic tent the charred face of Goose, and he says, oh God, and he quickly storms out the room, and Sergeant McFadden says, "Max, what's going on? Are you okay?" And then Max angrily says, "That's not Goose in there, sir. That's not Goose in there," and he runs out of the ICU. Later on, late that night, Max wakes up from a horrific nightmare, and then he begins to cry. He looks over to his sleeping girlfriend, and he says to himself, "I can't do this anymore. I can't." Early the next morning, Max goes over to the Halls of Justice, and he goes up to the apartments of Sergeant McFadden, who was there watering his plants outside the apartment. And Max says, "Sergeant, I have to talk to you, sir." And then Sergeant McFadden looks at Max. He knew what was going to happen, and Max says to him, "Sergeant, sir, I am hereby resigning for May Force Patrol." And Sergeant McFadden says, "Damn it, Max, no. Listen, I know you're shaken up by what happened to Goose, but you know the dangers that come with being an MFP officer. We lost a lot of good men over the years." And then Max says, "Yes, we have, but not in these alarming numbers." And Max goes on to say to the sergeant, "There's only a handful of us left, sir. You know what? It's getting crazier and crazier out there," says Max. "And I feel I'm becoming one of them. The only difference is I have a badge that says I'm one of the good guys." And then Sergeant McFadden says, "Okay, Rakentowski, listen to me. Just take 2 weeks vacation. Think about it, and if you decide to resign, I'll accept it. And then Max says, deal. But he says to the sergeant, I'm not going to change my mind, sir. And then Max walks down the stairs, and then Sergeant McFadden says, damn it, Max, they say society doesn't have heroes anymore, but we're going to give them back their heroes. And Max says, thanks for the inspirational speech, sir, and he keeps walking away. So Max and Jesse go up to the Panhandle for their vacation. They load everything to Jesse's old burnt orange Dodge Intrepid, and they head out. Their destination, Sop Choppy in the Panhandle. There they're going to meet an old relative of Jesse's named May. They eventually reach the outskirts of the town, and there Max pulls up to a mechanic shop. And Max comes out with a flat tire, and he asks the mechanic, I just saw your sign, can you fix this tire? And the mechanic says, yeah, I can. It'll be $40. Max says, deal. And then Jesse says to Max, Max, I got a hankering for some sugar. I'm going to go look for some ice cream. And the mechanic says to Jesse, oh, there's an ice cream shop just about a mile up from here. They'll appreciate the business. And Jesse says thanks, and she gets into the Intrepid and drives off. Later on, Jesse was exiting the ice cream shop, and there they were, Toe Cutter and his gang. They're all there camping out in the area. And of course, they saw the beautiful Jessie exiting the shop, and the gang run up to her with Toe Cutter saying, well, hello there. What's your name? And Jesse gives him a stern look, and he goes on to say to Jesse, can I have some of your ice cream? And he starts making some obscene gestures with his tongue. And one of the other gang members says, I'd be careful if I were you, lady. I've seen him lick his eyebrows clean. Jesse lets out a smile and quickly knees Toe Cutter in the groin and shoves the ice cream cone in his face. And she quickly gets in the car and speeds off. She later arrives at the mechanic shop, crying at Max, and she says to Max, crying, to get in quickly to the car. Max gets in quickly, and she speeds off. The mechanic says, hey, where are you going? What about your tire? And it's like, damn it. Soon, Toe Cutter and his gang arrive, and he asks them about that couple. They arrived at May's farm. It was nice and secluded. She greeted them along with her big brown dog, and she says, oh, Jesse, so nice to see you. Max, it's nice to see you too. Max goes on to explain to May what happened and asked her to call the sheriff. The sheriff came and they gave a report, and the sheriff says, well, we'll look for them. They're probably long gone by now, he says to them. And then the sheriff leaves. Jesse was still shaken up from what happened. And May's like, come on, let's just go inside. Dinner will be ready soon. We'll be fine. The next morning, Jesse decides to go to the beach. She walks through the wooded area that separated the house and the beach. And May's big brown dog was accompanying her. After she arrived to the beach, she sets up everything and goes swimming in the ocean along with May's dog. After she was finished, she decides to dry off under the giant umbrella. She falls asleep. The sun was not hitting her directly due to it being right over the umbrella, and the umbrella was big and dark. May's dog wanders off over the dune. When Jessie wakes up, she packs up everything and she whistles for the dog, but the dog didn't show up. And as Jessie was making her way back through the wooded area, she felt that she was not alone. And she was right. Toe Cutter's gang were there, stalking her. She finally saw the men running behind the trees. She screams and she runs. She was running through the woods. She got kinda lost, and then she stumbled onto a horrific sight. Hanging from the tree, gutted like a fish, was May's brown dog. She lets out another blood-curdling scream, and she keeps on running and running wildly through the woods until she makes it back to the farmhouse. She arrives to the front door. May's like, what's going on, Jessie? And Jessie was telling her what was going on. Then Max, who arrived at that moment from the auto parts store, asked Jessie what's going on. She tells Max what was going on. And Max tells May, call the sheriff. I'm going after these guys. And then Max grabs one of May's shotgun and decides to search the property. May says, Max, don't do it. There's too many of them. But Max says to May, you and Jess get out of here now. Please, get to safety. Get to the police station. Then May says, okay, Max. And then May and Jess run to the burnt orange Dodge Intrepid. and Jesse starts it up and they start leaving. As they were leaving, suddenly the gang come out of nowhere and start attacking the car, and May screams, "Jesse, floor it now!" And Jesse floors it. They see that the gate to the property was closed, and May tells Jesse, "Don't worry, just run right through the gate." And Jesse plows right through the gate at high speed. They get onto the main road, but then suddenly the car stalls. Jesse and May quickly get out of the car, and they could see what caused the car to break down. A piece of metal rod that was securing the gate had embedded itself into the front end of the car, deep within it, causing damage to the fan and the engine belt. And May says, "Oh no, no." And then Jesse decided to go on foot. She ran as fast as she could. Unfortunately, she's wearing sandals. And the gang was starting to catch up to them on their motorcycles. May quickly grabbed her shotgun from the car, and she went behind the car and decided to take a shot at the gang with her shotgun. She was able to kill one of them, but they all just whizzed around the stalled Intrepid, heading right for Jesse. And they all ran her down in cold blood. Jesse lied in the middle of the road, bleeding. Max had finally caught up on foot as he saw the distraught May crying, saying, "Sweet Jesus, no." And Max caught up to see if May was alright, and she says, "I'm alright, it's Jesse." And Max ran towards Jesse. It felt like forever that he ran as he saw the woman that he loved out in the middle of the road, slowly bleeding to death. Well, eventually, help came, and she was ambulanced to the nearest hospital. At the hospital, Jessie was in the ICU. They were forced to amputate one of her arms, but there was really nothing else they could do. The ICU doctor was telling Max the extent of her injuries. It read like a grocery list. Max was just staring into space as the doctor was explaining everything to him. And he says to Max, "Mr. Rakotowski, I don't think your girlfriend's going to make it through the night." But Max just still stared into space, and the doctor was just wondering if he was even listening to him. The doctor walks off, and then the nurse asks the doctor, "What are we going to do, sir?" And the doctor says to the nurse, "Well, there's really nothing we can do." A few nights later, at the Halls of Justice, Toe Cutter and his gang attacked the Halls of Justice, and in the firefight, they killed several MFP officers, including Sergeant McFadden, and injured several of them. But the attack did decimate a good number of the Toe Cutter's gang. Well, the only survivors of this attack were Charlie and Roop, who were out on patrol that night. Later that morning, at the beach house, Max was sitting at the bench looking at the sea, battling the grief that he was overcome with, knowing that Jess was going to die soon. Max gets up from the bench and runs into the house. He opens the trunk containing his uniform and sawed-off shotgun. He puts it on. Then he makes his way down to the Halls of Justice to see the destruction. Charlie and Roop were there, lending assistance to the injured MFP officers. When they see Max, Charlie, who now has an electrolarynx due to his voice box being damaged from that chase, says to Max that Sergeant McFadden was dead. Max just walks away. He goes into the Halls of Justice and takes everything he could, ammunition, food, and the keys to the Pursuit Special that was still in the garage. He gets into this Pursuit Special, starts it up, and speeds off. Max made his way back to the outskirts of Sodchoppy. at the mechanic's shop. The mechanic was underneath a car working on it. He thought it was Toe Cutter and his gang coming back, and he says, "Toe Cutter, is that you? Bubba Zanetti, is that you?" Then Max puts his foot on the mechanic's creeper and pulls him out, and the mechanic says, "Hey, who?" And then he recognized Max and it's like, "What do you want?" And then Max asks him about the whereabouts of the biker gang. The mechanic refused to talk, and Max pushes the mechanic's creeper with the mechanic on it back underneath the car. The mechanic hits his head pretty hard. Then Max proceeds to grab the jack and lowers the car onto the mechanic. The mechanic screams, and then Max pumps the car back up, and he puts his foot on the mechanic's creeper again and pulls the mechanic out, and he asks him again, where was the biker gang? And then he goes on to say to Max, okay, they're out on the beach looking for fuel. Sure enough, a good chunk of the gang were stealing gasoline from a gasoline truck. One of the bikers was ahead of the truck driving really slow, so that way the truck was driving slow, and the rest of the gang quickly climb onto the tanker and start pumping fuel out into the gas cans. Unbeknownst to them, they were being watched by the Death Black Pursuit Special with Max inside, waiting to strike. As the slow-moving rig was passing by, Max quickly starts up the engine and starts the pursuit. After the gang got done with their gas robbery, Max was close behind them, and then he floors it, flying right by them, causing one of the members to skid out of control and fall onto the pavement. The others stop and help him, and as he gets back up, he signals to them to go after that guy in the black car. Max turns the car around and heads back to the biker gang at high speed. As he quickly caught up to them, he blares his horns and plows right through them. The only one to survive that encounter was Johnny the Boy, and he quickly goes to a highway phone and he pries it open with a pry bar and contacts Toe Cutter. Toe Cutter and Bubba Zanetti were leaving the ice cream shop when Toe Cutter went to grab his helmet off his bicycle. Several pictures fell out of the helmet. It was a picture of Max and Jesse. He knew who was the one that took out the others, and Toe Cutter decided to get Max before Max would get him. Well, after some stalking, Max finally tracked down what could have been a lead. He sees Johnny the Boy laying in the field and his bike laying in the field. Maybe he got into an accident. Max stops the pursuit special and he gets out. He walks across the street to the body of Johnny the Boy. Suddenly a shot rings out and a bullet flies right through the right knee of Max. Max falls to the ground and he hears two motorcycles starting and they were coming at him. It was Toe Cutter and Bubba, and Max's sawed-off shotgun was in the middle of the road. He reaches out with his left hand to grab it, but the two motorcycles run over his right arm. There was extreme pain, but thanks to his leather jacket, there was really not that much damage. The two bikers stop, and Bubba says to Toe Cutter, "I'm going to get rid of him." And then Bubba races back towards Max, but Max quickly grabs his sawed-off, lifts up his upper body, and takes aim and shoots Bubba off his bike. Bubba goes flying off his bike and hits the ground dead. Johnny the Boy quickly gets onto his motorcycle and heads off the opposite direction, and Toe Cutter hisses like a cat and speeds off. Max, struggling to get up, finally gets up. Dragging his injured right leg, he finally makes it to his pursuit special. He gets in and speeds off and heads after the Toe Cutter. The chase was on. As the toe cutter was going high speed in his motorcycle, he can hear the wailing sound of the pursuit special coming up quick as Max was flooring it, and Max was just staring coldly with his target zeroed in. And the pursuit special was already going to speeds well above 125 miles an hour. Toe Cutter looked back in terror as the pursuit special was now right behind his bumper, ready to run him down. But finally, the final gear of his motorcycle kicked in, and he gained a boost of speed, but it was too late. He didn't see the oncoming semi right ahead of him, and Toe Cutter crashed dead on at 140 miles against the semi, and the semi just rolled right over him. Toe Cutter was dead. There was still one more member of the gang to get, and it was Johnny the Boy. Max didn't even stop. He continued on, and he entered into the closed-off area of the interstate. There was a sign with a skull and crossbone that says, "Enter at your own risk." And the sun was setting and the storm was rolling in. Max drove through the night, fighting fatigue, and he was also dealing with the heavy rains. But finally, it stopped raining and the dawn came, and he may have found the last member of the gang. Johnny the Boy was at a truck wreck. A pickup truck looked like it had flipped over and went down a huge hill. And Johnny the Boy was dragging the body and just doing some looting. He was taking the boots off the dead driver. And then he saw Max was there, and he says, Oh man, it's you. I didn't kill him. He was already dead when I found him." And then Max points his sawed-off shotgun at him and says, "All right, let's go." And then he grabs Johnny the Boy and takes him to the flipped pickup truck. Max takes his handcuff and takes off Johnny the Boy's boots and puts the handcuff on the left ankle of Johnny the Boy's leg, and then he drags Johnny the Boy to the back of the wrecked pickup and cuffs the ankle to the tow package, and then Max could see that there was gasoline spilling from the tank. Max yanks Johnny the Boy's lighter from around his neck. He takes some tape that was on the grass and used it to tape the Zippo lighter to keep it lit, and then Max takes some broken headlight from the front of the wrecked pickup and then brings it over to the rear. And there he puts the broken headlight beneath the spilling fuel. As the gasoline was starting to fill up the broken headlight like a bowl, Max takes the still lit Zippo lighter and puts it next to it. The whole time that Max was doing that, Johnny the Boy was saying, "Oh, come on, man. You heard what the judge said. The judge said I was crazy." But then Max, after he was done doing what he was doing, pulls out a hacksaw and throws it to the 17-year-old, and he says to Johnny the Boy, "Those handcuffs are made of high tensile steel. You could cut through it in 10 minutes with that saw. But if you're really brave, you can cut off your ankle in 5. And Max, dragging his right leg, climbs back up the hill and gets onto the interstate and gets into his Interceptor and drives off, and Johnny the Boy laughing, saying, "Yeah, you think I look stupid here, don't you? Uh-huh." Well, as Max was driving away, he could see in the rearview mirror a giant explosion. Max was now driving aimlessly through the closed-off sectors of the interstate. He sees another storm was rolling in. Now he was heading to who knows where. The future was uncertain, but all he knew now was he got his revenge. Every last member of that biker gang was dead. His girl was avenged, his sergeant was avenged, and his best friend was avenged. The end. Like and subscribe.